Watch us via Roku on your smart TV. Submit your own content to 1530entertainmentllc@gmail.com. Download the Millennium TV app from the App Store to stream our shows anywhere, anytime. Millennium TV.
Hello and welcome to Millennium News TV 24/7 Global News Update. My name is Todd, David Goldfinger, and here's today's top stories. Thanks for being with us. Jurors will hear closing arguments Friday in the trial of 4 men accused of a brazen conspiracy to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. A case built with informants, undercover agents, secret recordings, and 2 people who pleaded guilty and cooperated. Only one defendant, Daniel Harris, chose to testify in his own defense. But his denial of any crime Thursday was met by an aggressive cross-examination in which prosecutors used his own words to show his contempt for Whitmer and even suggestions about how to kill her. Adam Fox, Barry Croft Jr., and Brandon Caserta declined to testify, and defense attorneys called only a few witnesses. The 4 deny any scheme to get Whitmer at her vacation home in the fall of 2020. Though they were livid with government as well as restrictions imposed during the COVID-19 pandemic, the men were arrested in October 2020 amid talk of raising $4,000 for an explosive that could blow up a bridge or stymie police after kidnapping, according to trial evidence. Fox twice traveled to northern Michigan to scout the area. Next news. Federico Motka's abductors greeted him in English after his colleagues were kidnapped near a refugee camp on the Turkish border. "Welcome to Syria, you mutt," in quotes. For the Italian aid worker, it was the beginning of 14 months of brutality at the hands of the Islamic State. Motka testified about the ordeal Thursday at the terrorism trial of El Shafee El-Sheikh, a British national charged with taking a leading role in an Islamic State kidnapping scheme that took more than 20 Westerners hostage between 2020 and 2015. 4 journalists, James Foley and Steve Sotloff, and aid workers Peter Kassig and Kayla Mueller were among them. Foley, Sotloff, and Kassig were decapitated. Mueller was forced into slavery and raped repeatedly by the Islamic State's leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, before she too was killed. Motka is the first surviving hostage to testify at El-Sheikh's trial in Alexandria, Virginia. Born in Trieste, Italy, Motka said he spent much of his childhood in the Middle East and went to boarding school in England. He was an aid worker surveying the needs of refugee camps in March 2013, when he and a colleague, Briton David Haynes, were captured and taken hostage. Next news. A 12-year-old student was shot and killed Thursday by another 12-year-old student inside their South Carolina middle school, authorities said. The shooter was found hiding under a deck at a home not far from Tanglewood Middle School in Greenville about an hour after the shooting was still armed. Greenville County Sheriff Hobart Lewis said the boy is charged with murder, possession of a firearm at a school, and possession of a weapon by someone under 18. He was taken to a juvenile prison in Columbia, Lewis said, in quotes. He was hiding. He's a young man, probably didn't understand the consequences of what had just happened. End quotes, the sheriff said at a news conference. In quotes. I don't think he knew what to do, honestly, except for to leave the school. End quotes. The boys knew each other, but the sheriff said investigators are still trying to figure out what led to the shooting in a front part of the school and how the boy got the gun in the first place. Next news. When Texas Governor Greg Abbott put in motion abuse investigations into the parents of some transgender kids, Child Welfare Supervisor Randa Mullinex said what happened next strayed from normal protocols. There was unusual secrecy, with texts and emails discouraged. Allegations about trans kids received elevated status. In Texas, fewer than 3 in 10 child welfare investigations end with findings that harm likely occurred, classified as reason to believe. But the changes looked to Mullinex like these cases would be predetermined from the start. In quotes. It was my understanding that they wanted to be found reason to believe. Okay. Mullinex told the Associated Press in her first interview since leaving the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services, where she worked for 6 years until quitting last month. In quotes. That's why we're having to figure out a way to staff it up and see how we go about it, since it doesn't match our policy right now. End quotes. As early as Friday, the Texas Supreme Court could decide whether the state can resume at least 9 investigations into the parents of transgender children. They're the first to fall on the radar of child welfare authorities since Texas's Republican governor in February directed the state to begin handling reports of gender-confirming care for kids as child abuse, the first such order issued in the U.S. We're going to take a short break from the daily global English news of Millennium News TV 24/7. Please stay with us. Thank you.
Millennium TV, bridging communities worldwide. We broadcast diverse international content from Europe, Asia, Africa, and now right here in the USA. Watch us via Roku on your smart TV. Submit your own content to 1530entertainmentllc@gmail.com. Download the Millennium TV app from the App Store to stream our shows anywhere, anytime. Millennium TV.
Hello and welcome back to Millennium News TV 24/7 Global News Update. This is the continuation of today's top stories. Thanks for being with us. President Joe Biden on Thursday ordered the release of 1 million barrels of oil per day from the nation's strategic petroleum reserve for 6 months, a bid to control energy prices that have spiked after the U.S. and allies imposed steep sanctions on Russia over its invasion of Ukraine. The president said it was not known how much gasoline prices could decline as a result of his move, but he suggested it might be, in quotes, anything from 10 cents to 35 cents to a gallon, end quotes. Gas is averaging about $4.23 a gallon, compared with $2.87 a year ago, according to AAA. In quotes, the bottom line is if we want to lower gas prices, we need to have more oil supply right now, end quotes, Biden said. End quotes. This is a moment of consequence and peril for the world and pain at the pump for American families, end quotes. The president also wants Congress to impose financial penalties on oil and gas companies that lease public lands but are not producing. He said he will invoke the Defense Production Act to encourage the mining of critical materials for batteries in electric vehicles, part of a broader push to shift toward cleaner energy sources and reduce the use of fossil fuels. Next news. A lot is known about the few hours that shook American democracy to the core. The defeated president's incendiary speech, the march by an angry crowd to the U.S. Capitol, the breaking in, the beating of cops, the, in quotes, when they were quoting to hang the vice president then at that time, threats, the lawmakers running for their lives, the shooting death of rioters Ashley Babbitt, all of that chaos unfolded over about 8 hours on one day, January 6th, 2021. But for all that is known about that day, piercing together the words and actions of Donald Trump over that time has proved no easy task. Even though a president's movements and communications are closely monitored, there's a gap in the official White House phone notations given to the House committee investigating January 6th from about 11 a.m. to about 7 p.m., according to two people familiar with the congressional investigation into the riot. Details may still turn up. The former president was known to use various cell phones and often bypassed the White House switchboard, placing calls directly. And over the past 4 months, a lot has surfaced about what Trump did do and say on January 6th in texts, tweets, videos, calls, and other conversations. The following account is based on testimony, timelines, and eyewitness reporting gathered by the Associated Press and the Washington Post and CBS News, and from officials and people familiar with the events who spoke to the AP on the condition of anonymity. Next news. The House has passed a bill capping the monthly cost of insulin at $35 for insured patients. Part of an election year push by Democrats for price curbs on prescription drugs at a time of rising inflation. Experts say the legislation, which passed 232 to 193 Thursday, would provide significant relief for privately insured patients with skimpier plans and for Medicare enrollees facing rising out-of-pocket costs for their insulin. Some could save hundreds of dollars annually, and all insured patients would get the benefit of predictable monthly costs for insulin. The bill would not help the uninsured, but the Affordable Insulin Now Act will serve as a political vehicle to rally Democrats and force Republicans who oppose it into uncomfortable votes ahead of the midterms. For the legislation to pass Congress, 10 Republican senators would have to vote in favor. Democrats acknowledge they don't have an answer for how that's going to happen. In quotes, if 10 Republicans stand between the American people being able to get access to affordable insulin, that's a good question for 10 Republicans to answer. End quotes, said Representative Dan Kildee, Democrat of Michigan, co-sponsor of the House bill. In quotes, Republicans get diabetes too. Republicans pass away from diabetes. End quotes. Next news. Lawmakers have moved to the brink of shaking hands on a scaled-back bipartisan compromise providing a fresh $10 billion to combat COVID-19, a deal that could set up a final congressional approval next week. The price tag was down from an earlier $15.6 billion agreement between the two parties that collapsed weeks ago after House Democrats rejected cutting unused pandemic aid to states to help pay for it. President Joe Biden requested $22.5 billion in early March, with leaders hoping to move the package through Congress quickly. The lowered costs seem to reflect both parties' calculations that agreeing soon to additional savings would be too hard. The effort, which would finance steps like vaccines, treatments, and tests, comes as Biden and other Democrats have warned the government is running out of money to counter the pandemic. At the same time, the more transmissible Omicron variant, BA.2, has been spreading quickly in the US and abroad. We're going to take a short break from the daily global English news of Millennium News TV 24/7. Please stay with us. Thank you.
Millennium TV, bridging communities worldwide. We broadcast diverse international content from Europe, Asia, Africa, and now right here in the USA. Watch us via Roku on your smart TV. Submit your own content to 1530entertainmentllc@gmail.com. Download the Millennium TV app from the App Store to stream our shows anywhere, anytime. Millennium TV.
Hello and welcome back to Millennium News TV 24/7 Global News Update. Here's a continuation of today's top stories. Thanks for being with us. Emergency relief and evacuation convoys for the besieged Ukrainian city of Mariupol remained in doubt Friday following reports of Russian interference, while Russian officials accused Ukraine of flying helicopter gunships across the border between the two countries and striking an oil depot. The governor of Russia's Belgorod region said the alleged airstrike caused multiple fires and 2 people were injured. A Kremlin spokesperson said the incident on Russia's territory could undermine negotiations between Russian and Ukrainian representatives that resumed by video link Friday, in quotes. Certainly, this is not something that can be perceived as creating comfortable conditions for the continuation of the talks, end quotes. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov replied when asked if the strike could be viewed as an escalation of the war in Ukraine. It was not immediately possible to verify the claim that Ukrainian helicopters targeted the oil depot or several nearby businesses in Belgorod, also reported hit. Russia has reported shelling from Ukraine before, including an incident last week that killed a military chaplain, but not an incursion of its airspace. Next news. As Moscow's forces bogged down in Ukraine, many young Russians of draft age are increasingly jittery about the prospect of being sent into combat. Making those fears particularly acute is an annual spring conscription that begins Friday and aims to round up 134,500 men for a one-year tour of military duty. Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu pledged at a meeting of the military brass this week that the new recruits won't be sent to the front lines or hot spots, in quotes. But the statement was met with skepticism by many in Russia who remember the separatist wars in the Southern Republic of Chechnya in the 1990s and early 2000s, when thousands of poorly trained young men were killed. In quotes. I don't trust them when they say they won't send conscripts into combat. They lie all the time. End quotes, said Vladislav, a 22-year-old who is completing his studies and fears he could face the draft immediately after graduation. He asked that his last name not be used, fearing reprisals. All Russian men aged 18 to 27 must serve 1 year in the military, but a large share avoid the draft for health reasons or deferments granted to university students. The share of men who avoid the draft is particularly big in Moscow and other major cities. Next news. As energy prices soared last fall, she tacked fleece blankets over her doors and windows to keep the cold out, and started serving Jacob breakfast in his room so she didn't have to heat the living room. But she's consumed by worry that she can't pay her utility bills and that her son isn't warm enough. In quotes. There are effects on his health, end quotes, said Rutherford, a 29-year-old single mother who lives in southeast London. In quotes. He's constantly catching colds. End quotes. People across the United Kingdom will face similar choices in coming months, with energy costs for millions of households set to rise by 54% on Friday. It is the second big jump in energy bills since October, and a third may be ahead as rebounding demand from the COVID-19 pandemic and now Russia's war in Ukraine pushes prices for oil and natural gas higher. Energy costs are the main driver of rising consumer prices. While inflation is a worldwide phenomenon, it's a bigger issue in Britain because it's more exposed to rising natural gas prices than even its gas-reliant European neighbors, where utility bills and other costs also have soared. Prices for natural gas, which is used for electricity and heating, have more than doubled in the past year. In the UK, economists warn of the biggest drop in living standards since the mid-1950s, fueled by rocketing energy costs, fuel prices, and pre-planned tax increases. Disposable household incomes, adjusted for inflation, are expected to fall by an average 2.2% this year, according to the Office for Budget Responsibility. Next news. About 16 million residents in Shanghai are being tested for the coronavirus during the second stage of the lockdown that shifted Friday to the western half of China's biggest city and financial capital. Meanwhile, residents of Shanghai's eastern districts who were supposed to be released from 4 days of isolation have been told their lockdowns could be extended if COVID-19 cases are found in their residential compounds. The lockdown in Shanghai being done in 2 phases over 8 days to enable testing of its entire population has shaken global markets worried about the possible economic impact. China's manufacturing activity fell to a 5-month low in March. A monthly survey showed Thursday as lockdowns and other restrictions forced factories to suspend production. For 4 days starting Friday, residents of Puxi on the west side of the Huangpu River, dividing Shanghai, cannot leave their neighborhoods or housing compounds. The gates at some compounds were locked from the outside, with groceries and meals delivered to collection points. Government workers and volunteers wearing full protective equipment went door to door with megaphones in the city with 26 million people, calling on residents to report for testing at designated sites, where they were met by long lines and waits for more than 90 minutes. China's National Health Commission said another 1,787 domestic cases of COVID-19 had been recorded on Thursday, including 358 cases in Shanghai. Another 5,442 tested positive for the virus without becoming ill. 4,144 of them in Shanghai. We're going to take a short break from the daily global English news of Millennium News TV 24/7. Please stay with us. Thank you.
Millennium TV, bridging communities worldwide. We broadcast diverse international content from Europe, Asia, Africa, and now right here in the USA. Watch us via Roku on your smart TV. Submit your own content to 1530entertainmentllc@gmail.com. Download the Millennium TV app from the App Store to stream our shows anywhere, anytime. Millennium TV.
Hello and welcome back to Millennium News TV Global News Update. Here's the continuation of today's top stories. Thanks for being with us. Pope Francis heads to Malta this weekend, with the refugee exodus from Ukraine casting a haunting backdrop to the European migration drama that for years has focused on Malta and other Mediterranean countries and the plight of desperate people who arrive on boats seeking refuge. Francis, on a 2-day visit to the Mediterranean island nation, was always expected to focus on migration, Given Malta's frontline place in Europe's refugee debate and Francis's frequent calls for nations to show solidarity to those fleeing war, famine, and poverty. Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the forced exodus of 4 million people, half of them children, have added a new impetus to Francis's trip, which was originally scheduled for May 2020, but postponed because of the pandemic. Some in Malta see a double standard at play in the war in Ukraine, in terms of European refugee norms and the willingness of European countries to share the burden of accepting newcomers. The 2003 Dublin regulation stipulates that the European Union countries where would-be refugees still arrive generally must process asylum claims. This puts an enormous burden on frontline countries such as Malta, Italy, and Greece to host migrants while the process plays out. That rule has been set aside in the Ukraine exodus, with the EU for the first time adopting a, in quotes, temporary protection directive, allowing Ukrainians to resettle anywhere in the 27-nation bloc. Most have stayed in neighboring Poland, but many have traveled onward to find family members across Europe. In quotes. The Dublin rule has been sort of ignored, and justly so, because there is an unprecedented situation which needs flexibility, end quotes, said Malta Archbishop Charles Scicluna, in quotes. We would like to see that sort of flexibility when it comes to situations of emergency in the Mediterranean, end quotes. Next news. The Turkish prosecutor in the case against 26 Saudi nationals charged in the slaying of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi made a surprise request Thursday that their trial in absentia be suspended and the case transferred to Saudi Arabia, raising fears of a possible cover-up. The panel of judges made no ruling on the prosecutor's request, but said a letter would be sent to Turkey's Justice Ministry seeking its opinion on the possible transfer of the file to Saudi judicial authorities. The state-run Anadolu agency reported, trial was adjourned until April 7th. The development comes as Turkey has been trying to normalize its relationship with Saudi Arabia, which hit an all-time low following Khashoggi's grisly October 2018 killing. Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu said in an interview on Thursday that Saudi authorities were more cooperative on judicial issues with Turkey, but did not elaborate. In arguing for the transfer, the prosecutor told the court that the Saudi Chief Public Prosecutor's Office requested the Turkish proceedings be transferred to the kingdom in a letter dated March 13th, and that international warrants issued by Ankara against the defendants be lifted, according to the private DHA news agency. Next news. A spike in global energy prices benefits Saudi Arabia as the world's top oil exporter. But problems remain for the kingdom's impulsive crown prince. Whether trying to find jobs for a growing number of unemployed youth or finding a way to end the long war he launched in Yemen. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and his father, King Salman, now face a potential pivot point for the kingdom amid Russia's war on Ukraine. Can the ruling Al Saud family reset a now troubled relationship with the United States? Long the security guarantor for the wider Persian Gulf as tensions simmer with Iran and higher fuel prices squeeze Washington? Or does the kingdom tip toward further China, now its biggest buyer of crude, or even Moscow? An American rapprochement seems unlikely. Asked in a recent interview about what he'd want President Joe Biden to know about, Prince Mohammed bluntly said, in quotes, "I don't care," in quotes. "It's up to him to think about the interests of America," end quotes. The prince added. For Saudi interests, however, perhaps no other country in the world stands to rapidly benefit financially from the war as the kingdom. Its vast oil resources located close to the surface of its desert expanse make it one of the world's cheapest places to produce crude. For every $10 rise in the price of a barrel of oil, Saudi Arabia stands to make an additional $40 billion a year, according to the Institute of International Finance. Next news. Inflation in Europe soared to another record, according to new EU figures released Friday, in a fresh sign that rising energy prices fueled by Russia's war in Ukraine are squeezing consumers and adding pressure on the central bank to raise interest rates. Consumer prices in the 19 countries that use the euro currency rose by an annual rate of 7.5% in March, according to the European Union Statistics Agency, Eurostat. The latest reading smashed the high set just last month when it hit 5.9%. Its fifth straight month that inflation in the Eurozone has set a record, bringing it to the highest level since record keeping for the euro began in 1997. Rising consumer prices are a growing problem around the world, making it more difficult for people to afford everything from groceries to their utility bills. Spiking energy costs are the main factor driving inflation in Europe, with those prices surging 44.7% last month, up from 32% in February, Eurostat said. Oil and gas prices have already been rising because of increasing demand from economies recovering from the depths of the COVID-19 pandemic. They jumped higher after Russia, a major oil and gas producer, invaded Ukraine, on fears that sanctions and export restrictions could crimp supplies. At an outdoor market this week in Cologne, Germany, shopper Andreas Langheim bemoaned how life was getting more expensive. We're going to take a short break from the daily global English news of Millennium News TV 24/7. Please stay with us. Thank you.
Millennium TV, bridging communities worldwide. We broadcast diverse international content from Europe, Asia, Africa, and now right here in the USA. Watch us via Roku on your smart TV. Submit your own content to 1530entertainmentllc@gmail.com. Download the Millennium TV app from the App Store to stream our shows anywhere, anytime. Millennium TV.
Hello and welcome back to Millennium News TV 24/7 Global News Update. Here's the continuation of today's top stories. Thanks for being with us. When the end of the COVID-19 pandemic comes, it could create major disruptions for a cumbersome U.S. healthcare system, made more generous, flexible, and up-to-date technologically through a raft of temporary emergency measures. Winding down those policies could begin as early as summer. That could force an estimated 15 million Medicaid recipients to find new sources of coverage, requiring congressional action to preserve broad telehealth access for Medicare enrollees and scramble special COVID-19 rules and payment policies for hospitals, doctors, and insurers. There are also questions about how emergency use approvals for COVID-19 treatments will be handled. The array of issues is tied to the coronavirus public health emergency, first declared more than 2 years ago and periodically renewed since then. It's set to end April 16th, and the expectation is that the Biden administration will extend it through mid-July. Some would like a longer off-ramp. Transitions don't bode well for the complex U.S. healthcare system. With its mix of private and government insurance and its labyrinth of policies and procedures, healthcare chaos, if it breaks out, could create midterm election headaches for Democrats and Republicans alike. In quotes, the flexibilities granted through the public health emergency have helped people stay covered and get access to care. So moving forward, the key question is how to build on what has been a success and not lose ground, end quotes, said Juliette Kubansky, a Medicare expert with the nonpartisan Kaiser Family Foundation, who has been researching potential consequences of winding down the pandemic emergency. Next news. The British government is ending the supply of free rapid coronavirus tests to most of the population, even though COVID-19 infections remain at record levels, and health officials warn the pandemic could still have nasty surprises in store. More than 1.7 billion test kits have been handed out in workplaces, pharmacies, and by mail over the past year, the government says. Under a policy that encouraged people to test themselves regularly as a way to stamp out new outbreaks. But starting Friday, most people in England will have to buy lateral flow tests from pharmacies or online suppliers. Lateral flow tests use throat or nose swabs and give results in minutes, but are less accurate than the PCR swab tests used to officially confirm cases of COVID-19. Tests will remain free for staff in high-risk settings such as hospitals, nursing homes, hospices, and prisons. But under the government's, in quotes, living with COVID plan, most other people in England will now have to pay. Some free testing will continue for several weeks in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Lawmaker Daisy Cooper, health spokeswoman for the opposition Liberal Democrats, said scrapping free tests would be another expense for people already coping with surging food and energy prices. Next news. The Grammys might be missing stars like Drake, The Weeknd, and Kanye West as a performer, but the biggest night in music could still shine bright on the Las Vegas Strip. The ceremony relocated to Las Vegas for the first time ever, with several artists who could have epic nights, including Billie Eilish, Olivia Rodrigo, and John Baptiste. The awards shifted from Los Angeles because of the rising COVID-19 cases and Omicron variant in January. Sunday's show will air live beginning at 8 p.m. Eastern on CBS and the Paramount Plus streaming service. Host Trevor Noah calls Las Vegas the perfect place to have a celebration, with fans at the MGM Grand Garden Arena. Last year, the Grammys had a music festival vibe, with parts of the show held outdoors in an intimate in-person setting with music artists mixed with pre-taped performances. Noah expects an entertaining show with several performers set to hit the stage, including Rodrigo, Eilish, Lil Nas X, Jack Harlow, Brandy Carlisle, Batiste, Silk Sonic, H.E.R., Chris Stapleton, Leslie Adam Jr., and Brothers Osborne. He said the awards will be a celebration of the music industry coming back to life. Next news. Giannis Antetokounmpo loved the fact that he became Milwaukee's career scoring leader on a three-pointer, so nobody can say he's just a dunker anymore. Otherwise, there is no reason for celebrating after passing Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, in quotes. When I'm done, we can talk about it, but now there's no time, end quotes. Antetokounmpo said, leading ahead to Friday's game against the Clippers, in quotes. There's things that have to be done. Antetokounmpo's record-setting three-pointer forced overtime, and he made 2 free throws in the final seconds to give the Bucks a 120-119 victory over the Brooklyn Nets on Thursday night. The defending NBA champions clinched a return to the postseason with the win in which Antetokounmpo had 44 points, 14 rebounds, and 6 assists. Jrue Holiday added 19 points, and Chris Middleton had 16 before being ejected for a flagrant foul midway through the third quarter. Kevin Durant had 26 points, 11 assists, and 7 rebounds for the Nets, but missed a three-pointer that would have won it. Kyrie Irving scored 25 points, and Bruce Brown had 23 points, just as in the memorable end to their second round series last summer, when the Bucks overcame 48 points from Durant, most ever in a Game 7. Overtime was needed to determine a winner. Milwaukee took that one, 115 points to 111 points, and pulled it out Thursday behind a second straight 40-point game from Antetokounmpo. It says the Greek Freak has been dismissed famously by James Harden as a great athlete, but not necessarily a skilled basketball player. But the NBA Finals MVP has become a confident, I guess they call him a shooter, and his teammates are confident with him. Great. And in quotes, we just fight, compete, and know that obviously it helps to have that big fellow on your team that can literally break a game open for you and make plays. End quotes. Bucks swingman Wesley Matthews said. This has been the daily global news update of Millennium News TV 24/7. Thank you for being with us. Thank you. Please log in to get the latest news on all of our social networking sites. That means Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. On TikTok, we are Millennium News 24. Also on YouTube. Our YouTube channel is News Channel M24. Viewers now on both network broadcasting, Android and iOS devices, Apple TV, Roku TV, Amazon Fire TV. Also, all smart TV platforms. Please enjoy our entertainment and latest news, views, and current events. Our Millennium TV apps, Millennium TV USA, Android, Millennium News Google, www.millenniumtv24.com. Stay with Millennium News 24. Thank you. God bless.